Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. As you can tell, I've got a bit of a different background today as well. I painted this circle the other day. It literally took me 6 hours. Worth it though. So I've literally tried to film this video like a couple of times, and both times I've just completely failed because essentially I'm really awkward at talking about like serious things. Like when it actually gets like serious and whatnot, I start to get a bit weird. So apologies if that kind of happens now. See, I'm already doing it. I knew this would happen. Essentially what we're going to be talking about today, a little bit of a story time for you all, is how I got diagnosed with autism. So when I got diagnosed, I actually got diagnosed with Asperger's now, and I don't say Asperger's because to me it just doesn't sit right. Like that sounds weird. But now it's not really a case of you get diagnosed with like Asperger's, etc, etc. It's just all classified. Is that the right word? It's essentially all ASD. It's all classified as ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. But yeah, I essentially made a little bit, oh my god, see what is going on? Doesn't help I've had like 6 coffees. So I made a TikTok like a week or 2 weeks ago, that's irrelevant, like the whole put a finger down sort of thing, but like autism edition. It was a little bit of a joke, but like also not, and I got like quite a few comments on it asking me about like how I got diagnosed, what kind of signs there were, etc. So what I said I would do and what I thought would be best, because obviously there's only so many questions I can answer on TikTok, and like it's such a quick thing, like obviously the maximum is like a minute, and there's so much that I could fit in, like that I couldn't fit in, sorry. So I thought I'd sit down and actually do like a story time, like a proper story time where I can tell everyone everything. This is literally the longest intro in the world. Oh my days. So without further ado, let's get into this video. I will just start from the beginning. So like I didn't get diagnosed till I was 13 years old. It's quite common, especially in girls, to get diagnosed really late and for people to actually notice autistic traits in girls until quite later on in life. Even 13 is actually still pretty early. Like I know quite a lot of people who didn't get diagnosed until like their 20s, 30s. Like I've even heard of someone who didn't get diagnosed till they were like 50, which is crazy. Well, not crazy, but like it seems pretty mad to me that it takes that long for people to start like recognizing it. So a massive reason that girls do not get diagnosed early on is because we're really good at putting up what we call a mask, and essentially the mask is like our coping mechanism, and we are able to do it by copying behaviors of other people that we see and sort of taking those behaviors on as our own, which is like pretty cool but also absolutely exhausting. And essentially my mum didn't know anything about autism, like my parents didn't know anything about autism. My mum actually started getting to know this person who was a male in his 50s, I think, and she started getting to know him, and she started seeing, and he had autism, and she started seeing traits in him that she really recognised in me. And by this point she hadn't really come into contact with many people with autism and didn't really know much about it, but things just started sort of clicking for her basically. And then after that she started like looking into autism a little bit more, looking into especially autism in girls a little bit more, and just things started falling into place for her. I think one of the main things that I struggled with when I was younger was reading facial expressions and understanding tone of voice. So my mum said that one time she was literally like just talking to me like all normal, just having a conversation with me, like not angry at me at all, but just having a conversation, and all of a sudden I just started screaming and crying and telling her to stop shouting at me, and she was literally like, what? Like, are you okay? Because she just wasn't, and I was just like, stop shouting at me, stop shouting at me. I don't need to do the whole reenactment, but yeah, basically. And she was like, whoa, okay, that's not, you know, typical. That's not normal behaviour. I'm really confused with this whole interaction basically. A couple other things as well. I think that it's really funny, and like I know I'm going off on a bit of tangent here when I say this, but it's really funny looking back on my childhood and on certain things that I did, on certain like behaviours, etc. Like it's so funny to me and my mum now, because I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert. My mum is now actually part of an autism group that she sort of helped to start within a hospital like in the past couple of years, and so obviously she knows quite a lot about it. I know a fair amount, because I've taught myself and I've learned about it, because that's how I find I cope with things better. If I know more about them, I know how to deal with them and I know how to face them. That's just like the way that I deal with things. Yeah, it's really funny for me and my mum to now look back, and we always chat about it on certain things, and we're like, oh, literally, like, knowing what we know now, we like recognize certain things and we're like, oh my gosh, that's why I was being such a little bitch, like that's why I was doing this, that's why I was doing that. Like, I especially remember this one outfit that my mum bought me. Oh my gosh, because like one main characteristic, like autistic trait in me is like sensory issues. Like, I have massive sensory issues, especially with like things like how things feel, like, and really heightened smell, but mostly how things feel. That is like, yeah, that's probably what gets to me the absolute most out of all the senses. And my mum had bought me this, like, it was like a long tartan skirt and like this overcoat and like this hat, all matching, all tartan, all this real, I can literally still imagine it, like I can still remember it. It's really scratchy sort of feeling outfit. And every time, and I was like probably like 5 when my mum put me in it, every time she put me in it, I would just be so grumpy, and I would always throw a strop about putting it on. And my mum just thought it was because I didn't like the way it looked, and at that age I wasn't able to communicate how I was actually feeling and what was affecting me. Like, there's so many textures even now that really get me, like wool, oh, don't know. Okay, I'm not gonna list them because it's giving me tingles. Let's move on. See, I knew I'd go on a tangent, I forget what I was saying. This is what's happened every time I've tried to film this. There was other traits as well, as like the sensory issues, the inability to read people's facial expressions, the inability to just really communicate how I was feeling in certain situations. I used to get such huge sensory overloads. I used to be that child in a busy place that was just sitting on the floor screaming and crying because like I just couldn't deal with it. Like, it was just too much, but I wasn't able to, I didn't know why I was feeling like that. I thought that was normal. I thought that was like just how things were. I don't know, it's crazy to think back on it. But yeah, so there was all these like little things that linked up. I'm also have massive hypermobility. Look at that bad boy. Party trick right there. Oh, that was a click and a half. Yeah, massive hypermobility. Yeah, just a lot of things, and they all just started like tumbling and gathering, and my mum was like, oh, okay, like light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. In the end, she was like, right, okay, let's just get her assessed, because like, what's the worst that could happen, you know, if she does have it. And she was pretty sure at this point that I definitely was autistic. She was like, if she does have it, it will make it easier. It will make it easier for school, it will make it easier for her like building relationships, because that was a massive thing for me, was like being able to build relationships, especially with people my own age. Just because I didn't know what was socially acceptable. I didn't learn that. Like, that comes to a lot of people quite naturally. Even now, I have to work really hard at that. My filter, I've literally got no filter. I was about to say, my filter is bad. Like, I just don't have a filter. However, I've learned to like build one, if that makes sense, but it's still, yeah, it still catches me off guard even now. Things like that, and ways of people telling me to do things, etc. Like, ways of just working, especially in school. My mum was like, this would help so much if their teachers knew, because one thing that I'm not good with is if someone shouts at me, because I get sensory overload so easily. If someone shouts at me, I just shut down. Like, if you're shouting at me, you're just not going to get through to me. Like, nothing is going to go into my brain. Like, you may as well call it a day. So like, for instance, at school, if I got into trouble, teachers would shout at me, I would just shut off, or I'd laugh nervously or anything like this, or I'd just cry, because I just didn't know how to deal with that amount of emotion coming at me. Like, it was just too intense. So my mum was like, yeah, like, we'll be able to then tell her teachers, and her teachers will then like be able to communicate with her a lot better, and it'll just be a lot more efficient, basically. And also for exams, exam-wise as well, like, I'm not great. I was never great in exam conditions. It would always really freak me out to the point where I would just feel physically sick, because I'd be in an exam hall and literally everyone would be like writing and doing stuff and whatnot, and I would just hear every single thing. Like, I remember for GCSE, initially when I did my mock exams, they didn't let me have my own room, because they were like, you don't need your own room, like, you're doing well in class, that you don't need your own room, like, you don't need that extra help, and etc. Because they they just didn't really know about autism that much, and so I did my mocks in the exam hall with everyone else, and I remember getting into my maths GCSE mock exam, and I literally sat there and cried the whole way through, literally just head to the table, just cried the whole way through, just tears running down my cheeks. I felt too anxious to ask anyone for help. I felt too anxious to ask if I could leave. I just couldn't cope with it, and I literally sat there and cried, and it was it was an awful experience, I have to admit. Like, it was really awful. And then luckily, like, for my actual exams, they let me have my own room, which was so much better, because it was just the little noises. The little noises just felt so amplified in my head because I was under such high stress about the exam in the first place. All those little noises and those like feet tapping and the pencils and whatnot was just like amplified in my head to the point where it was just so overwhelming. So yeah, my mum decided, let's get her assessed, and sort of go from there. We did like the AQ test, so just like an online test, which is also, if you want to do it, it's available online. I'll link it down below actually. It's a really like simple test. You just sort of answer questions as you go, and it kind of tells you what the deal is. Obviously that is not a diagnosis. If you do that test and you score high, that is not a diagnosis. I want to stress that before we go any further. But it can give you a good idea, like, yeah, whether or not like you should or shouldn't go and actually get assessed, if that makes sense. It's just a good starting point, I think. So I literally scored so high on the test, and I was like, okay. And then my mum, if you haven't heard of Tony Attwood, 100% look him up. Absolutely amazing man. He is an autism specialist. He does a conference in Oxford every year with, what's her name? With Michelle Garnett. They are incredible people, really funny as well. And they essentially do a conference called Autism Oxford in Oxford. And my mum took me to one of these, and I sat there and essentially listened to this man describe my feelings. And that in itself was so overwhelming, because by this point I still hadn't learned how to communicate my feelings. Like, I still hadn't learned how to communicate to other people how certain things were making me feel, because I didn't understand them myself. And it was so overwhelming, but kind of in the best possible way, to literally have someone on stage saying things that were in my brain, like being able to communicate the things that were in my brain to me. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but it was so overwhelming. I did actually cry there as well. I cry all the time. It's actually quite funny. I did actually cry. I got really overwhelmed because I was like, oh my gosh, like this is just, like I'm actually getting like goosebumps thinking about it now. I don't even know why. But yeah, it was just so intense, because he was literally like, this is how, like this is why this makes you feel like this. And I was literally sat there like, all these emotions I'd never been able to speak about before, because I'd never had the words to do so. And someone's just there doing it for me. I was like, pop off, sis. So yeah, 100% I'd recommend looking him up. He's written some books as well. He's just cool, and so is Michelle as well. But that was before I actually fully got diagnosed. So we went to that and I was like, wow, okay then, cool. So the next step is then you have to get a referral. So you can get this from like school, a GP, and you've just got to get referred. So essentially you've got to have a reference from someone that is not in your immediate family, saying that they also recognise traits in you, if that makes sense. So my mum requested a referral from my first school. So I was in one secondary school from year 7 to year 9, and I left in year 9 and went to a different one. And the first school that I was in actually refused to give the referral because they didn't see the traits. They were like, no, we don't see it, so we're not gonna give you the referral. They just flat out refused. I remember my mum said that she went to parents' evening, and when she was sort of talking to all my teachers, she was like saying like, do you not recognise this, do you not recognise this? And they were all like, no, we don't see it, sorry. And then my mum spoke to my Spanish teacher. I don't know if I can say his name. I won't say his name just for like privacy purposes, but yeah, spoke to my Spanish teacher, who was literally the best man. He was probably one of my favourite teachers, and it's understandable why as well. So my parents spoke to him, and I didn't even really like Spanish that much, but I enjoyed being in Spanish class because of like, I just enjoyed the atmosphere, it was good. My parents spoke to him, and they said, okay, yeah, so we're just talking to all of Sasha's teachers. We think she might be autistic. and we want to get opinions from like her teachers and see if anyone else has noticed, blah, blah, blah. And my Spanish teacher turned around to my parents and went, and he was very Spanish, like he was actually Spanish himself. And he turned, I'm not going to do the accent because I don't want to offend anyone, but he turned around and he was like, I've always thought that Sasha was special. And my mum said that she sat there going, oh dear, like where is this going? Like, what is he about to say? But it actually turned out that before he worked in the school that I went to, he actually worked in a school for people with autism, and he had noticed from the off start, like first lesson I had with him, and he actually then adapted his teaching ways when he was teaching me and interacting with me in order to accommodate for that. So, you know, no freaking wonder why I loved Spanish, because he was actually, I didn't even realise that that's what was happening, because obviously I'd never spoken to him about it, I didn't even know that I was and stuff like that. So I just think that's so cool, and it shows that if you, especially from an educational point of view, if you're aware of these things, there are ways to adapt and there are ways to accommodate. And he can't have been doing anything massive, because it's not like everyone thought I was getting special treatment or anything. It would literally just be such simple things, like in terms of the way he spoke to me, in terms of the way he asked me to do things, in terms of the way he just explained things. Like, I just really enjoyed going to Spanish because I found it the least stressful place, like the least stressful class, but I just enjoyed being there because I found it manageable and I found it easy to process. So yeah, there's that. So my mum was pretty happy that, like, obviously he had sort of recognised it. She was like, okay, cool, brilliant, like that's good. So then my mum asked our GP, and our GP was actually like a family friend as well, so he'd literally known me pretty much all my life. And obviously, like I said before, girls are really good at masking their autism. Like, we essentially, in public, we will put up this mask and be able to put up such a front, and then we'll get home and we'll just blow up, because all those emotions that we've kind of suppressed throughout the entire day come out because we're in our safe space and we are around people that we trust and, you know, we feel comfortable around. So it was quite hard for my mum to sort of present the traits in me to people that especially we'd known and we'd been around in social situations, because they'd never seen me in an environment that I was 100% comfortable in. He was, yeah, very apprehensive, I think, to give me the referral. Eventually he agreed to do so, which was good. We were then on the waiting list. I'm pretty sure it was for about, I want to say almost a year, to actually have the assessment. Now, I don't know how long at the minute it would normally take after you get referred, but I think it is still quite a long time. So just keep that in mind, that you might have to wait around for a little bit until you actually get the assessment. But when I did, it was like a face-to-face assessment with a psychiatrist. They sort of just like ask you, I can't even remember what they asked me, to be honest, quite a lot of questions. It's quite a lengthy process. Obviously they can't just be like, ask a few questions and then decide. Like, it's quite a lengthy sort of like not interview, but assessment. And yeah, so went through that whole process with the face-to-face, and then they diagnosed me with Asperger's, or now we like to call it ASD. So yeah, that is kind of like the whole process. And then after that, I do want to say, like, after that, my school, we were able to notify my new school, because by this point I'd just moved, able to notify my new school and sort of tell them, and then the teachers could then sort of just be aware of it. Like, the thing is, because I am technically high functioning, like I'm pretty good at coping with things, and I'm pretty good at adapting to situations, and I'm pretty good at bouncing back from situations. But some of the time my processing time is just awful, especially if someone's talking really, really fast, or if someone is doing multiple things at once. Like, I remember sometimes just getting so overwhelmed in class because like the teacher had like this getting you to like read things in a book, and also is talking and also has a PowerPoint going and is also playing music in the background, and I would literally be there like feeling dizzy because I would be like, there's too much going on right now. So just like little things like that, like they were able to accommodate and make sure that there wasn't too much going on, or if they were explaining things to me, they were making sure that I had understood, because I'm awful for when people are explaining things to me. I would literally just be like nodding and being like, yeah, yeah, and actually not listening to a single word, like no word is going into my brain. And I'd be like, yeah, yeah, and they'll be like, do you understand? I'm like, yeah, yeah. and then they leave and I'm like, what just happened? And I think what you can learn as well from my experience is that always ask for a second opinion, because obviously my teachers in the first school were so adamant that like they was just so quick to refuse and so quick to shoot it down that I could be autistic. And especially I think it's getting better now. I think people are becoming a lot more aware and it is more spoken about and it is becoming more normal to sort of talk about it. And like I don't personally think that the fact that I've got autism means that there's anything wrong with me, and I think a lot of people think that. I remember meeting a guy once and I don't know how it came up, I don't know how we got into the conversation, but I remember telling him that I had Asperger's, I was autistic, and he was like, oh same. And like, I remember all his mates were there, but like we were just having like a private conversation, and he was like, oh same. And I was like, oh okay, like cool. And he was like, but like don't tell any of my friends. And I was like, oh, like of course I won't, but like how come they don't know? And he was like, well, I just don't want them to think there's something wrong with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like they're not gonna think something's wrong with you, like, and if they do, they're not the kind of friends that you want in your life. I mean, come on. And essentially it came out that his mum had actually told him that he shouldn't tell anyone he was autistic because he was bad and it meant there was something wrong with him. And I literally remember just being so sad and thinking, like, how toxic is that? Like, there's nothing wrong with you. I actually had a comment on one of my videos saying that like I didn't have autism because I didn't look like it. And this is one thing that I've never understood. Like, I don't understand what autism is meant to look like. Like, do I need to wear a badge? Like what? And a massive misconception as well is that people with autism are all introverts. Like all people with autism are all introverts. They don't like socializing, they don't like going out, they don't like hanging around with lots of people. And that literally could not be further from the truth. Yeah, of course, you do have introverted autistic people, but you also have introverted neurotypical people, and you have extroverted autistic people and extroverted like neurotypical people. Do you know what I mean? Like I would consider myself an extrovert. I love hanging out with friends, like I like going out, I like doing like extrovert things, like yeah, there's no other word for it. And that doesn't make me any less autistic just because I like doing it. What it does mean is that I use a lot of energy very quickly, and I burn myself out quite easily. But that's by choice. Like I know that that's going to happen because I know that when I am out with people, subconsciously, like I don't do it on purpose, when I am with people, around people, I do have my mask up, and I do have to put in a lot of energy to not make myself fit in. Like it's actually really hard to explain. I put up a lot of energy to, I really don't know how to explain it. Essentially it just takes a lot of energy, but like I'm happy with that. And then after I've had quite a lot of sort of like social outings or like social interactions, I then have to take some time away and be like, okay, reboot, let's get our energy back. But I do think that that's like pretty much everyone as well. It's not just because you're autistic, do you know what I mean? But yeah, so that's a massive misconception for a lot of people, is that we can't be extroverts, and I just want to break that down. I know that has absolutely nothing to do with any of this video, but I just thought I'd chuck it in just because that comment. My attention span, oh my gosh, today, honestly, what's going on? Coffee, that's what's going on. Caffeine. But yeah, that is essentially the whole story of how I got diagnosed. If you have literally any questions, feel free to DM me. You can DM me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. If you have any questions and you want to comment them down below as well, absolutely feel free. But yeah, that is literally everything that I've got to say, I think, today. I'm happy to talk to everyone about my own experiences, but I cannot diagnose anyone. I'm not a psychiatrist. I will literally link all of my social medias in the description below. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel. Yeah, until next time, bye!